Hi, bye, John. Let's get straight into it, all right? So, have you ever taken a test and majority of us have, right? And so don't be silly, but you ever taken a test and all your brain power is just gone, right? Cuz sometimes you have really really difficult problems that you have to go through, things like that within the test. You've studied for it hard and things like that. Maybe you haven't, but still it's like it taxes your mind a bit, right? And even if you have like natural talent and being smart, it still kind of like drains you, in my opinion, because that's what happens to me. It completely drains my brain, and then I just become stupid again, right? So, I always thought there was like a reason to this, and Alex Hamosi, if most of you know, he's a YouTuber, right? An entrepreneur. He's talked about this on his channel before. There's this concept of basically how we have a certain amount of brain power or brain energy or energy expenditure within like our like thoughts and things like that, whatever you want to call it, right? Um, and we basically have to use that on very very important decisions, because if we don't, then all of it will get taken up by the little decisions that don't even really matter. All of our brain power get taken up by those things, right? So I like to think about it a lot like this. If you game, you'll understand this, but if you don't, I'll explain this in a second too, to where it'll make more sense. You know how in video games, bro, when we play video games like League or I don't know, Overwatch or things like that, it's like your abilities are either on a cooldown or they're mana based. Okay, mana being like the bar that you have that indicates the amount of sort of mana you have, which allows you to then use abilities, and these abilities cost mana. Okay, so that's how that works for those of you who aren't gamers. Okay, but if you aren't, I'll explain it in a better way. But basically, think about this for those of you who are, right? So probably you, if you've gamed at all before, it's like a mana bar. It's like having a mana bar, but for your brain, right? What happens when you use a certain ability? It costs a certain amount of mana, right? And after all that mana goes down, it's like you gotta wait for it to recharge again. That takes time. So our mana recharge is like our sleep. Okay? You wake up early morning fresh with a full bar recharged, 100% mana, okay? Now, how do you know what to spend your mana on? And how do you avoid spending mana on things that are useless or that would be considered useless for your goals? Like not particularly useless, I would say, but things that shouldn't require that much thought, that you can kind of minimize the mana on. You know how like if you upgrade your character in the video game, it minimizes the cost that it'll take to use the ability? Kind of like that. Like, how do we do that, right? And so far I've implemented this tactic and it's helped. And now that I'm in Pakistan, the accent just comes out of nowhere, bro. But anyway, now that I'm in Pakistan, right, it's different because I've started to lose some of the good habits, but lose some of the bad habits as well. But what I've realized is my mana expenditure is going back up on trying to do the good habits. It's taking a lot more thought, which I think is not necessarily a good thing, because the more thought I'm using, basically it's like the more mana I'm using, the faster I get drained, and then now I literally have zero brain power to do anything. So how do we use it on the thing that's important? First of all, like for example, our most important thing would be like our ultimate ability, right? Does the most damage. So how do we do the most damage to our day, and use it effectively, use the mana where it needs to go, and also minimize all the other things? So like that ability that you probably shouldn't be using, but you do anyway for whatever reason, just to spam it. It's like, you don't need to use that, okay? There's a specific time and place, but like, let's just say your goal is to do the most damage output. You wouldn't use that in this scenario, right? So it's like, how do you how do you focus on using your ult more? Because in the video game, you could just press a button, right? How do you focus on doing that? It's like, look, you already do what you're doing. The way you focus on what's important and focus your brain power on what is most important is by, I think, minimizing the things that aren't important and using your brain power on that. Like you have to minimize the amount of brain power you use on the things you deem as unimportant. So like what's unimportant and what's not. It's like that depends on your situation, right? Are you trying to, what is your goal right now? If you have a goal in the gym, keep focusing on that. If you have a goal when it comes to school, keep focusing on that. And by focus, I mean like keep it there. But then think about all the other things you do throughout the day that are taking your brain power away from you, which in turn is taking your brain power away from you using it on that important thing, important goal, right? So what does that look like exactly? So for example, right, sometimes I would wake up and what was hard for me to do is deep work, right? And I would wake up and do like my entire morning ritual. But I realized that takes a lot of brain power. But the only scenario in which it doesn't take a lot of brain power is if I get used to it. If you get used to it, like especially like your breakfast, like your eating habits, if you get used to them and if you're not someone who's picky about it and can eat the same things all day, every day, then you will thrive with this. Because what will happen is if you keep those consistent habits, right, and you keep those up, what's happening is you're getting better and better, meaning you stop using as much brain power because they're subconscious. They're just integrated. And you might say, well, isn't that like kind of a bad thing because then you're not like present? But I don't think it has anything to do with that. You could be present, but you could still do things on a subconscious level that don't require brain power. Like, for example, when you're practicing something, right? Think about the first time you practice something you're good at. You had to use a lot of brain power. Like, for example, driving a car, right? You had to use a lot of brain power. Be like, okay, this is the brake. This is the accelerator. Maybe like not a whole lot, but more than what you do now, because now it's just second nature. Now it's just subconscious. Now it's just a habit. You don't have to use a lot of thought. You just push the brake when you see a car. Now where you have to use thought is the uncertainty of what goes on the road. That's what you have to use your brain power for, because anything can happen at any time, right? So same thing here. If you normalize all these habits, like normalize your eating habits, normalize your routines, then you'll see not necessarily something perfect, but a better increase in brain power for you to be able to use your brain power on the things you find important, because those are the things that are uncertain. Those are the things you still need to crack it down on. Those are the things that are hard for you to kind of sit down and think about, right? Like, for example, when I record these videos, one of the reasons I record them on a day-to-day basis is because I want it to be subconscious. I want to habituate it so much so that it's just second nature and I don't have to really put in a lot of brain power, because if I stop this habit, it's going to take a lot more brain power to do, which takes away brain power from the other things I want to do, right? So if you don't play video games, you might not understand that, but basically think of yourself as having like a energy bar, like kind of like a battery, like that, like the phone has, right? And you want to spend that battery on things that will actually give you rewards within your phone. So for example, your business, not like other things, right? Like spending time on social media, that's not going to give you a high return. So think of it like that, right? You want to spend your battery on things that are important. So at first, it'll take a decent bit of battery to, kind of habituate yourself to a lot of things that might be new to you. But once you do, you'll find that it takes a lot less battery to do those things, okay? I know it might not work like that in a phone, but like that analogy is good enough to kind of help you understand the point, right? So what's one way to use less brain power? Start having more of a routine. It'll definitely help. At first, it'll use a little bit of brain power, but it'll help, right? And make sure you try to stick to that routine, especially like your eating habits, because you're just going to be doing those things like incredibly quickly and incredibly, how do I say this, brainlessly almost. Like, you don't need to use a lot of your brain, which is kind of good, because if you're not putting thought into it, you're also being a lot more present with a moment rather than thinking about it, right? So that's kind of a good thing, in my opinion. Um, yeah, so that's just a concept I've been pondering on, and I think it's pretty cool. I want to know what you guys think in the comments. But yeah, I think habituating yourself to a schedule will definitely help you save your brain power for the things that are important. And one other thing that can help: start early in the morning, right? Because inevitably what happens is, no matter how you look at it, in a video game, you choose to use your abilities. In real life, you don't choose when you have thoughts. You don't choose when you do certain actions that like trigger certain things within your mind that kind of drain your mana bar or your energy, right? So try to do those things early in the morning if they're very, very hard for you to do, which is how I would kind of base your entire day. Do the hardest thing that's difficult for you to do right in the morning, because that's when you have the most mana. That's when you can just use your ultimate ability, because you have full mana bar. You're not concerned with, I got 30 mana left and the ultimate costs me 40 mana and I can't use it no more. Like, that's the excuse people use when they can't go to the gym later on in the day. It's like, for them it costs 40 mana, so now that they've gone through the entire day, it's just like, well, now I don't have any mana left, so now they have no energy left to go to the gym, and so because they're already depleted, and then they use that energy to do different things, right? So, but for someone like me who's habituated themselves to the gym, constantly going, I've reduced the mana cost, I've reduced the energy cost that it takes me to go to the gym, like mentally, right? And so now, where this guy who's a beginner who takes 50 mana to go to the gym, it takes me like 10, maybe 5, maybe even no mana, to be honest, to go to the gym. It takes me no brain power. It's just kind of something I do, right? Even though I'm not doing it right now, what it's going to cause is when I go back to the US and get consistent, it's going to take a little bit more brain power than it usually does. So maybe I was habituated and it take me like 5 brain power to go to the gym. Now it's going to take me 10, and maybe a little bit more. I'm just using those numbers just to help you picture it better, but it's going to take me more. It's going to have a higher energy cost, but once I get used to it, it's going to lower that energy cost, because now I'm just getting habituated to it, and I'm doing that activity like with no thoughts in my mind. I'm just doing it and saving my brain power for what's important, which is the deep work that I want to be able to do within the morning, right? So, yeah. I hope that really kind of helps put it into perspective more in like a gaming way and things like that, because I know a lot of you game, so that might help. But yeah, let me know what you think about that concept. I think it's a very, very interesting concept, and I think it could really help you if you choose to like adapt it within your mindset. You know what I mean? So, of course, there's some limitations to every like mindset sometimes, and some drawbacks, but I think for the most part, this is a really good way to framework your mind, because it just helps you face what it is that you haven't been doing for a long time immediately right as you wake up in the day. So yeah, that's all I got for you. Peace. Take it easy.